The awakening has already begun, though very few realize it. It isn't some grand spectacle with trumpets and thunder, though it may feel like that to those paying attention. Instead, it manifests in subtle shifts, in the way people look away from uncomfortable truths, in how silence fills rooms where once there was honest debate, in the way fear has seeped into everyday decisions. The machinery of modern life, with all its comforts and conveniences, has lulled most into a kind of hypnotic sleep. People are scrolling endlessly, distracting themselves with trivialities, convincing themselves that everything is fine because their lives are relatively predictable. But underneath, there is a quiet trembling, a growing dissonance, a sense that something essential is cracking. And that's the point where the chosen ones stand apart. They can feel it. They can see it. They sense that reality is not as stable as it once seemed. They notice when words lose their meaning, when promises are broken without shame, when the structures of trust erode silently. This perception is not paranoia, it is the capacity to recognize that the surface of civilization is far thinner than most believe. The chosen are awake not because they wish to be. It is far more comfortable to remain asleep, but because they cannot ignore the truth pressing in from every angle. Now, there is a responsibility that comes with this awareness. To see what others refuse to see is both a gift and a burden. Because once you recognize what is happening, you can no longer pretend. You can't close your eyes and go back to dreaming. You are held accountable for your knowledge, and with that accountability comes a demand to act differently. And this is what terrifies most people. They intuitively know that waking up means sacrifice, it means risk, it means the collapse of comforting illusions. It's why they cling so tightly to distraction. But avoidance has never prevented catastrophe. It only guarantees that when crisis comes, it will come unopposed. If you know that something is wrong but you silence yourself, you are not neutral. You are complicit. This is the hard truth that the chosen must internalize. Indifference is not an option. To remain asleep when you've been called to awaken is to forfeit the very essence of your soul. Think about history for a moment. Every great collapse, every cultural unraveling was preceded by signs, obvious glaring signs that people chose to ignore. Empires rotted from within long before they were conquered from without. The corruption of language, the erosion of values, the normalization of lies, these were always there, plain to see. But the majority preferred the comfort of pretending. It's easier to watch the circus than to acknowledge the fire in the tent. It's easier to believe the lie than to wrestle with the truth. But this is why civilizations fall. Not because evil rises, but because good people grow complacent. So what does it mean for you, for those who are chosen? It means you cannot afford complacency. You cannot live as though time stretches infinitely ahead, as though you can keep putting off responsibility until tomorrow. Awakening is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a demand for transformation. It calls you to stop living passively and to begin orienting yourself toward truth, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how costly. Now, this isn't about panic or paranoia. It's not about running into the streets proclaiming doom. That's just another form of distraction. What I'm talking about is something deeper, aligning your life with what you know to be true. It means refusing to say what you don't believe. It means paying attention to the smallest compromises you make each day, because those compromises slowly weave a net around you until you are bound by them. It means cultivating courage, not in grand heroic gestures, but in the daily discipline of honesty, integrity, and responsibility. And make no mistake, people will mock you for this. They will call you dramatic, paranoid, overly serious. They will laugh because it soothes their own unease. They'd rather ridicule the awake than confront their own slumber. But here is where the chosen must stand firm, because if you let mockery silence you, you will have abandoned the very thing that set you apart in the first place. The awakening is not a popularity contest. It is a lonely road paved with rejection. But it is also the only road that leads to life. If you hear this and you feel a stirring in your chest, that is the mark of your calling. You are awake because you were meant to be. You were given sight so that you could lead, not follow, resist, not complain, endure, not collapse. Don't treat this awareness as a curse. Treat it as a sacred trust, something given to you because you were capable of carrying it. So here is the question you must confront. Will you live as though the awakening has touched you, or will you bury it and pretend you never heard the call? Because one thing is certain, the world is shifting whether you act or not. The only question is whether you will rise to meet it as someone awake, alert, and unafraid, or whether you will sink back into the comfort of dreams until reality finally shatters them. And so, I leave you with this: the hour is late, the signs are clear, and the choice is yours. Stay asleep and you will lose everything without even realizing it. Wake up, and though it may cost you dearly, you will keep the one thing that can never be taken, your soul. Resistance will cost you everything, but compliance will cost you your soul. That is not just rhetoric, it is the brutal reality of living in times when truth itself has become dangerous. And you can see this pattern everywhere if you're willing to look. At work, in your social circles, even in your family, the pressure is relentless. Stay quiet, go along, don't rock the boat. Blend in, smile when you don't mean it, nod when you don't agree. And each small act of compliance feels insignificant on its own. But what people fail to understand is that these small acts accumulate. They form chains around the human spirit, chains that become impossible to break once they've hardened. The world whispers to you that compromise is harmless. It tells you, just keep your head down. It's only a little thing. Don't make trouble for yourself. And maybe you think you're being pragmatic, sensible, wise. But what you are actually doing is trading your soul piece by piece for temporary safety. Because the truth is, every time you betray your own conscience, you weaken the foundation of who you are. And eventually, there will be nothing left inside to hold you upright when the storm arrives. We've seen this across history. Ordinary people, good people, convinced themselves that silence was harmless, that obedience was necessary, that resistance was too costly. They thought, if I just go along this once, I can protect myself, my family, my livelihood. And maybe for a while, they did. But in the end, that bargain always collapses, because the forces that demand your compliance are never satisfied with just one concession. They always come back for more. And each time you say yes when you should have said no, you're teaching yourself to become weaker, more cowardly, more enslaved. That is why resistance is costly. It tears away illusions, it strips you of worldly comforts, it isolates you from the crowd. You might lose friends, you might lose status, you might lose opportunities. You might even lose the very things you thought you couldn't live without. But here's the paradox: when you resist, even at great personal cost, you keep the one thing that truly matters, your integrity, your soul, your alignment with what is real. And in the long run, that is worth infinitely more than comfort or convenience. Ask yourself this: what kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to be the one who bends when pressured, who says what he doesn't believe to avoid conflict, who shrinks into silence when truth is on the line? Or do you want to be the one who, even trembling with fear, stands firm because you know that lies, if left unchallenged, will consume everything? Now, I want to be very clear: resistance doesn't always look glamorous. It's not some Hollywood version of rebellion. Sometimes it looks like refusing to sign a piece of paper you don't agree with, even if it costs you a job. Sometimes it's refusing to repeat a phrase you know is false, even when everyone else around you parrots it to signal belonging. Sometimes it's simply telling the truth when you know it will make people dislike you. Small acts, yes. But each small act of resistance fortifies your soul. Each small act makes you stronger, more resilient, less corruptible. People often ask, but what if I lose everything? What if I end up alone? That is a valid fear. Resistance is not without risk. But here is the deeper fear you should consider. What if you keep everything, but lose yourself? What if you succeed in keeping your job, your reputation, your social circle, but you become hollow inside, a person who can no longer look himself in the mirror without shame? That is not life. That is slow death. The chosen ones are not called to comfort. They are called to courage. And courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act rightly despite fear. You must understand this: the world will always try to intimidate you into silence. The machinery of conformity will always push you to bend, but it cannot force you. Only you can give away your soul. Only you can decide that temporary safety is worth more than eternal integrity. And that's where the choice becomes stark. Resistance will cost you dearly in this world, but compliance will cost you infinitely more in the world within. That is the trade-off. You can cling to ease and be devoured, or you can embrace struggle and be preserved. You cannot have both. You cannot serve truth and comfort simultaneously. So you must decide: are you willing to pay the price of resistance? Or will you sell yourself cheap in exchange for the fleeting approval of the crowd? That is the question every chosen one must face, and there is no avoiding it. To resist is to suffer, yes, but to comply is to vanish. Remember this: you can lose everything on the outside and still stand tall inside. But if you lose your soul, you have nothing left, no matter how much the world applauds you. And so I say to you, better to walk alone in truth than to march in a crowd of lies. The battle is not out there, it begins within. And this is one of the hardest truths to accept because it's far more comfortable to imagine that the real problem lies entirely in the external world: corrupt systems, deceitful leaders, broken institutions, manipulative technologies. And yes, those forces exist. They are real. They shape our environment in ways that are deeply destructive. But here is the uncomfortable reality: none of those forces could dominate if the individuals they governed were not already weakened within. Tyranny flourishes first in the mind and the heart, long before it establishes itself in society. If you are fractured internally, if your thoughts are chaotic, if your fears control you, then you are already conquered before the battle even begins. It doesn't matter how strong you think you are on the outside, because the enemy doesn't need to break your body if your spirit is already in chains. And this is precisely why the chosen must begin their resistance, not with weapons or protests, but with the painstaking work of self-mastery. Think of it this way: if you cannot tell yourself the truth, how will you ever stand up and tell the truth to others? If you cannot discipline your own habits, your speech, your emotions, your appetites, how will you withstand the crushing weight of collective pressure? A person who cannot govern himself will always be governed by something else. That's the law of human nature. And so the first arena of battle is not the world out there, but the hidden world within. And this is not a trivial challenge. To fight within means confronting every shadow lurking in your psyche: your cowardice, your envy, your laziness, your resentment. It means dragging those parts of yourself into the light and refusing to let them fester. Because the truth is, if you don't master your own darkness, it will master you. And when the time comes to stand, you will find yourself paralyzed by the very flaws you refuse to confront. Now, this doesn't mean perfection. You will never be flawless, but you can be integrated. You can become a person who, though imperfect, is aligned, whole, consistent. When your thoughts, words, and actions point in the same direction, you gain a kind of inner solidity that no external force can easily shake. That is what it means to be fortified within, to live in truth so consistently that lies cannot take root in you, no matter how loudly they are shouted by the world. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who constantly tells small lies to avoid discomfort. He lies to his boss to make himself look better. He lies to his friends to avoid awkwardness. He lies to himself about his weaknesses. Over time, these lies form a web so tangled that he can no longer distinguish truth from fiction. Now imagine that man one day is told to repeat a much larger lie in order to keep his place in society. Do you think he'll resist? Of course not. His inner world is already built on falsehoods, and so resistance is impossible. He will comply, not because he is evil, but because he is weak, and weakness is what enables evil to spread. Contrast that with the person who disciplines himself to speak truth, even when it is costly. The one who keeps his promises, who confronts his flaws honestly, who orders his habits around integrity. That person may tremble with fear when faced with pressure, but he will not collapse, because his inner structure has been reinforced day by day, brick by brick. He has become the kind of person who cannot be easily bought or broken. That is what it means to win the battle within. You build a fortress out of truth, discipline, and courage that no external tyrant can tear down. And here is the sobering reality: most people will lose this battle. They will spend their lives pointing fingers outward, blaming systems, blaming leaders, blaming everyone but themselves. And while they are busy doing that, their own souls will rot. They will never realize that the war was lost, not because the enemy was strong, but because they themselves were too weak to resist. But you, the chosen, do not have that luxury. You must understand that the external fight depends on the internal one. If you want to resist the lies of the age, begin by refusing to lie to yourself. If you want to stand firm against manipulation, begin by disciplining your own impulses. If you want to fight for truth in the world, begin by becoming a person who actually embodies it. And this is not a one-time decision, it's a daily war. Each morning you wake up, you choose whether to let fear dictate your choices or whether to act with courage. You choose whether to sink into resentment or to rise with responsibility. You choose whether to repeat the convenient lie or to speak the uncomfortable truth. Every choice is a battlefield, and every victory strengthens you for the larger struggle. So understand this: you cannot change the world if you cannot first change yourself. You cannot stand against external tyranny if you are a slave to your own weaknesses. And you cannot call yourself awake if your inner life is still asleep. The battle begins within, and if you win there, you will be unshakable without. If you lose there, no external victory will matter. And so I leave you with this: before you look to fix the world, fix yourself. Before you demand courage from others, demand it from your own heart. because the greatest revolution begins not with armies or slogans, but with a single soul that refuses to be conquered from within. A narrow path remains, and it requires radical responsibility. That's the reality the chosen must face. We live in an age where most people want broad highways, easy answers, shortcuts to freedom. They want collective solutions that allow them to shift responsibility away from themselves onto leaders, governments, movements, or vague ideals. But the truth is, there is no wide and comfortable road to survival, integrity, or redemption. There is only the narrow path. And it demands something that modern culture despises: personal responsibility taken to its fullest extent. We've been trained almost from birth to believe that someone else will save us, that if things go wrong, the system will step in, that if we make mistakes, someone else will clean them up, that if society collapses, some leader, some hero, some institution will carry us through. This belief is a lie, and it's one of the most dangerous lies of our time, because what it does is it strips people of their agency, their capacity to act, their willingness to bear the weight of their own choices. It turns men and women into passive dependents, waiting for rescue while the structures around them corrode. But the chosen are called to something higher. To walk the narrow path is to accept that you cannot wait for rescue. You cannot expect someone else to shoulder the burden that belongs to you. You are responsible for what you believe, for what you say, for how you act, for what you tolerate and what you refuse. That responsibility is not optional, it is the price of awakening. And it is heavy, sometimes unbearably heavy, but it is also the only thing that gives life meaning, order, and dignity. Now, what does radical responsibility look like in practice? It doesn't mean you control everything. Life is too chaotic, too unpredictable for that. What it means is that you take full ownership of your role within the chaos. If your family is struggling, you don't point the finger outward first. You ask yourself what you can do to strengthen them. If your workplace is corrupt, you don't wait for someone else to clean it up. You decide that you will not participate in the corruption, no matter the cost. If society itself is unraveling, you don't drown in despair. You ask how you can become a stable center of truth and strength in the midst of it. And here's the paradox: though the narrow path isolates you from the majority, it also connects you with a deeper fellowship, the fellowship of the awakened. Because though each chosen one must walk alone in their own decisions, they are not truly alone. Across the world, scattered and hidden, others are walking the same path. And this scattered remnant, this fellowship of the few, forms a bond stronger than any shallow belonging to the masses. They are united not by convenience but by truth, not by comfort but by courage. And that kind of fellowship cannot be broken, not by pressure, not by fear, not by loss. You see, responsibility transforms you. At first, it feels like a crushing weight. It strips away excuses, it forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself, and it demands sacrifices that others will never understand. But over time, that same weight becomes strength. It hardens you against despair. It sharpens your mind. It makes your words carry weight, because you are no longer speaking as a passive observer. You are speaking as someone who has borne the burden of living honestly. And people can feel that. They may reject it, they may mock it, but they cannot ignore it. Without responsibility, freedom is an illusion. People think they're free when they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. But that's not freedom. That's chaos, and chaos always ends in bondage. True freedom is found in discipline, in responsibility, in walking the narrow path that aligns your actions with truth, regardless of cost. And that is what the chosen must learn. The road of least resistance leads to destruction, but the steep road of responsibility leads to life. Of course, this is not easy. Nothing about it is easy. You will stumble, you will fail, you will face moments where the path feels unbearable. You will look at the broad highway filled with crowds, and you will envy their ease. You will wonder if the struggle is worth it. But it is precisely in those moments that your decision matters most. Because the narrow path is not about perfection, it's about perseverance. It's about refusing to abandon the truth, even when you fall short of living it fully. It's about continuing to shoulder the burden, even when you'd rather set it down. And in that perseverance, you become something extraordinary. You become unshakable. You become a person who cannot be easily bought, manipulated, or broken. You become the kind of individual who carries meaning into a meaningless age, who shines light into darkness, who offers stability in a collapsing world. That is the power of radical responsibility. It doesn't just preserve your soul, it transforms you into someone capable of guiding others through the storm. So understand this: the path is narrow, and few will find it. But if you do, if you take it seriously, if you carry its burden, you will discover that what seems like a curse is in fact the greatest gift. Because on that path, you will find your truest self, you will find the strength to endure, and you will find the kind of freedom that no system, no tyrant, no power can ever take away. And so, let me leave you with this: do not wait for the world to save you, because it won't. Do not wait for the crowd to join you, because it can't. The path is narrow, and it is yours alone to walk. Take radical responsibility, and though the road is steep, you will find that it leads to life. So here we stand, awake in a world that would rather dream, called to resist when most would rather complain, commanded to master ourselves when many have already surrendered, and placed upon a narrow path that demands responsibility most cannot bear. And yet, this is our moment. This is the hour for the chosen to rise, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. The world does not need more sleepwalkers. It needs men and women who refuse to trade their souls for comfort, who will carry the weight of truth even when it isolates them. And if you are hearing this, and you feel that undeniable pull in your spirit, then know this: you were meant for this fight. You were not born by accident. You were chosen for this time. So walk forward with courage, pay the price of resistance, master yourself before the world masters you, shoulder the responsibility no one else will. And in doing so, you will become what this broken age desperately lacks: a light in the darkness, a voice of truth in the noise, a soul that cannot be bought, bent, or broken. Because in the end, everything can be taken from you: your comfort, your reputation, even your life. But if you stand firm, if you refuse to surrender what is eternal, then one thing will remain forever yours: your soul. Guard it well, and you will have conquered the world.